Welcome to CNN Talk, where we're talking about Boris mainly. We're talking about the Conservative Party leadership race. Are you following this closely, Bonnie?
I'm trying not to, but you know, unfortunately, it's in your face.
So you're very pro-Boris, presumably.
Oh yeah, I adore him.
As much as Trump?
Even more so. They both have the same sort of hair, which I love that hair.
Changed his hair.
Yeah, no, I love it. You know, especially when it blows back. It's quite chic. No, I mean Boris is probably going to be the choice of the Conservative Party, and therefore our Prime Minister. I don't see that being avoided at all.
Should we be keeping our eyes on Dominic Raab today? I was reading that we should be, because if he pulls out and throws his support behind Boris, then Boris is therefore a shoo-in. Is that correct?
I don't think anybody's a shoo-in as such. We should remember there are 10 candidates standing. Conservative MPs are voting as we speak. In fact, they finished voting in 4 minutes' time. We'll get the result probably about 1 o'clock after we've gone off air. But Boris Johnson has the most nominations so far, the highest level of support. And it's really the battle between second and third place, because the final two here were chosen by the MPs, go to the party membership.
When we don't get the final two today, though.
No, that will be sometime next week. So there will be at least one drops out today. I think it'll be more like 4 drop out today. There'll be one that is just eliminated, but there'll be 3 or 4 others who will just pull out because they recognise they haven't got the level of support. Frankly, most of them shouldn't have stood in the first place. So we will get a better picture after 1 o'clock as to whether it's going to be Boris Johnson versus Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, or Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary. Sajid Javid, Dominic Raab, Matthew Hancock, I don't think they're going to get the level of support needed to progress. But then, of course, all their votes have to be distributed among the other candidates.
Yes.
So Boris Johnson is not home and dry yet. I would say the main person that can beat Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson.
Yeah, by messing up something along the way, which is why we haven't seen much of him, presumably.
Right. He was very quiet yesterday. It was a very safe launch. And
it's the first time a boring speech has been seen as a success.
I think maybe that's, because his staff is trying to protect him from making any mistakes, as Ian said. So, I guess when you're the front runner, it pays to play it safe and not trip up.
Who does business support?
Well, I mean, of course, I think business in general is going to love a tax cutter and a regulation cutter. They're all going to fight and try to get that, but I'm not sure anybody really believes Boris, because Boris will say what Boris will say to get votes, right? And so, does he really believe in it? And I always wonder if Boris or any other politician really believe in their own philosophy, or do they have a governing philosophy? Or are they just trying to get elected? There's no shame in being ambitious, but what does he really believe in?
It's a sad thing to say. I think a lot of people really feel that about politicians, and that's very sad for our politics if we really believe that the people who are running in politics are not real. I mean, I'm not saying any of them aren't, but I think what you just said is more common a thought than not, and that's dangerous.
He batted a few questions away, personal questions, yesterday, on the basis that he said that the public actually want politicians that speak frankly and the truth. Do you think he managed to avoid some of those more sensitive subjects that he didn't want to approach?
Well, it was very interesting that at the beginning he said, right, we have 6 questions from the press, and then he had a list of the 6 journalists that he was going to ask questions.
Were they all Boris-friendly? They weren't,
No, not at all.
No.
But I don't know whether they'd sort of teed them up in advance, whether those journalists knew that they were going to ask questions. I suspect maybe they did. It was very controlled yesterday. Greg was right. It wasn't the most scintillating Boris Johnson performance we've ever seen. It wasn't a bad performance, but he played safe. He's the front runner. If you're the front runner in a race, you don't take risks. It's as simple as that. I've been interviewing all of the other candidates on my radio show for an hour, 1 a night, or 2 a night sometimes. Boris Johnson is the only candidate that hasn't confirmed that he will subject himself to an hour-long interview.
He hasn't said no.
He hasn't said no, but he hasn't said yes. And what I suspect is happening is that he's not going to do anything before the parliamentary rounds are over. I think after then, there's this 6 or 8 week period where the top two go around the country doing the hustings.
Where he's going to perform well.
I mean, he's going to
Yeah.
that will be in front of party members, but he's going to have to do television and radio debates. There's no doubt about it then, because the other candidate will expect to do that. You can't have a debate with one candidate.
You don't think it'll be Rory Stewart?
No, absolutely no chance whatsoever.
So who would be the other person?
Either Michael Gove or Jeremy Hunt.
Jeremy Hunt's middle ground man. Welcome to CNN Talk. We are talking about the leadership race here in the UK, the Conservative Party leadership race, which will also define the Prime Minister. They're voting for their new leader. The first round of this election process is currently closing, actually, here in the UK. We should hear the results of the first round, at least, in an hour or so. Would Boris Johnson be the best choice?
Boris Johnson is back in the spotlight with an ambitious agenda for Britain's future. The front-runner to succeed British Prime Minister Theresa May says he will deliver Brexit, unite Britain and defeat opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn.
This contest is not chiefly about any one person or even about the Conservative Party. It is the opening salvo in a battle to restore faith in our democracy.
I definitely think that Boris is the man to take us off the EU.
He also said that if they continue to kick the can, the Conservative Party will kick the bucket.
I use phrases and language that have caused offence. Of course, I'm sorry for the offence that I have caused, but I will continue to speak as directly as I can.
So I know Boris. I like him. I've liked him for a long time. I think he'd do a very good job.
I think he's a great MP. He does what he says, says what he wants, but at the end of the day, will we have that running the country? No.
We can get Brexit done and we can win.
Maureen says, I hope Boris wins because a clown won't last long.
Oh, that's the best comment I've ever heard.
Amanda says, is Boris as PM a worse joke than Donald as president? Equal, worse, slightly better? And Devon says maybe Trump could be the best next Prime Minister, could be a change of scenery.
I love those people.
I mean, if you go down there, the list, there's all sorts of Trump references. Is that our audience or the fact that they associate these two men?
I think if you want to be lazy and think in a lazy way, you can make that association if you want. I don't see really, apart from the fact that they're both fairly maverick and outspoken, I don't really see any similarities between them. Bonnie will say they've got similar hair. Well, possibly. It's a similar colour, depending on what day you see Donald Trump's hair, I suppose.
True.
Boris has the advantage that it is actually natural.
It is his hair.
Contrary to what you were saying, Max, just
Well,
now.
no, I heard some allegations that it might not be natural.
No,
that's natural.
It is absolutely
That's natural. I can
He
explain
is
how.
thinning a bit, though, which is very self-conscious.
These are important
about.
questions, aren't they?
They are
They
very
are.
important questions.
Bonnie likes to talk about imagery when she doesn't want to talk about the policy.
I will talk about the policy, but Boris' great-grandfather was a Circassian Turk. And those people were descended on their mother's side from Circassians who were valued for their hair. And they were slaves as well. So
From Game of Thrones or something.
no, this is true.
Where's it
Honestly.
going to end up?
And so they were valued for their hair. And so in his father Stanley, and in Boris's and his sisters and brother, this strain has arrived, and it is absolutely natural.
There's something you weren't expecting to learn here on CNN Talk.
Because all of his siblings they have the same hair.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
all
from
right.
it's
On
from their
the hair,
ancestor, yeah.
do you think the parallels are fair between Trump and Boris? Because a lot of people have suggested also that Boris is a lot more intelligent than Donald Trump, which is potentially unfair.
Arguable, but I do think that there are some similarities personality-wise. They're both very outspoken, and they both get a lot of attention. They both like hearing their own voice. I think there are a lot of differences too. Remember, Trump was elected, as the anti-establishment candidate, and
Despite being part of the establishment.
in many ways, but in many ways not. He was never a politician, never ran for office. So. There's some differences, and I think you saw this in elections around the world. We just saw it in the European elections where the mainstream parties have been rejected. Traditional mainstream or, politicians that are considered mainstream or considered establishment have been rejected. That's why we have Trump, but I wouldn't really argue that Boris would qualify for that. I mean, he went to Eton, he went to Oxford, he's kind of a,
But can I also add to that, and I'm saying this with a great deal of affection, I've lived in this country half my life. maybe almost longer than the United States. And one thing about the United Kingdom, that it's a deeply anti-intellectual country in regards to politics, and actually prides itself on it. You can go in any bar in France, Turkey, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, engage someone in politics on an intellectual level, and you'll find somebody. Not in the United Kingdom, and particularly in England. And it is a thing that people are very proud of. They get their politics sometimes from comedy shows. You never underestimate the British need to be entertained. And if you can entertain the British, you've got your foot in there a little bit. And Boris is very entertaining for a certain type of people. I think for the Conservatives, too, and I'm saying this as a compliment as well, Conservatives want to win elections. They're not here for anything else. They're not here to do this or do that. They're probably arguably the most successful vote-winning machine in Europe because they win. So they want to win. They understand viscerally that this man is the height of entertainment, and they're going to choose him and figure it out after he gets there.
Let's see how the newspapers took the speech yesterday from Boris Johnson. The Telegraph, for whom he has a column and is paid.
That's his Fox News.
Now is the time to remember our duty to the people, so reflecting how he was a bit more statesman-like yesterday. The Daily Mail saying victory on post offices, which is the wrong headline. Why would I go to that?
Because it was in your face.
So how did his young girlfriend tame him in time for the big launch? Can you explain this? Because he's got a younger partner, hasn't he? She's there on the right, and she's more than a partner. She's part of the campaign, some people suggest.
Carrie Symonds, someone I know not well, but know a bit, she used to be head of communications for the Conservative Party until comparatively recently, which is where she presumably met Boris. And Boris has a very checkered marital history, shall we say, and people are fascinated at who he takes up with, and Carrie Symonds is his latest girlfriend. Now, she has smartened him up. I mean, he's got this famous dishevelled appearance. He was always quite overweight. She's put him on some sort of veganish diet, which he hasn't enjoyed at all. She's tamed the hair. And she has made him look, shall we say, more like how we imagine a politician ought to look, made him look more prime ministerial.
She's also kept him away from interviews, is that correct? As someone
I don't know
who's
whether
bidding for
that's
interviews?
her. I mean, I'm sure she will have a say in this, but his media team certainly have kept him away from interviews. He hasn't done a single interview in this leadership campaign yet.
But you're interviewing all the leaders,
all the
candidates,
leaders.
and what's he said?
Well, he hasn't said yes, and he hasn't said no. I actually bumped into him in the House of Commons last Thursday, and it was one of those situations where he couldn't avoid me. So I just said, "Morning, Prime Minister," and he went, "Oh," as you can imagine him doing.
You did?
I did. And he said, "I'm supposed to be coming to be interviewed by you soon, aren't I?" And I said, "Well, that's the idea, but hasn't happened yet, has it, Boris?" And he said, "Well, I feel a moral obligation to do it." I said, "Well, you tell your people that, because you said that. I didn't." That was a week ago. Have I heard anything? No.
Just have a quick look at the Metro, because this is in reference... Just say no, Boris. This is about this question of cocaine, which came in... You know, Michael Gove admitted taking cocaine, so everyone asked Boris whether he took cocaine. There was a suggestion in a previous interview that he had. Now he's not talking about it. Do you think it's fair that he batted the questions away?
Well, I think, first of all, in the case of Michael Gove, which I find particularly alarming, Michael Gove was Justice Secretary, Lord High Chancellor, the highest legal officer and in charge of our justice system. Now, I personally would have told my boss, I would love to do this job, but I actually took Class A drugs. I had it recreationally. Maybe something was passed around. He did this, but he should have said it.
Should have declared it.
Yeah, he didn't.
Maybe he did.
Well, okay, you're right, but we didn't know. Okay, so that Boris batted away the question.
Let's listen to him first.
Okay.
We've got him batting away the question.
Were you telling the truth then, and do you regret the fact that you took a Class A drug?
Well, I think the canonical account of this event when I was 19 has appeared many, many times, and I think what most people in this country really want us to focus on in this campaign, if I may say so, is what we can do for them.
Well, that's the Trumpian deflect, but he does it much more charmingly because he's an old Etonian. But that's the classic Trumpian deflect. I'm going to tell you what I want to talk about, and because
Trumpian, it's just what politicians do all the time.
but it's become sort of more foregrounded and conscious for ordinary people.
But also,
that it's there.
a lot of the members of the public might agree with him. They don't want to get caught up with all these sort of...
Yeah, this goes back, I mean, W, I thought, said it well. You know, when I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible. And I think, you know, does that mean we should give everybody a pass? The question is it would be really unfair if Boris was asking everybody else and not talking about himself. But if, you know, is it the right question? I'm not sure.
Well, people don't
I don't
care.
think they care.
They don't really care because that's the landscape we have now. People don't really care. They want to know what he can do. But one quick thing about Kerry Simmons, what I noticed on the Mail, which I thought was very interesting, she's made him look like her. So if you, I mean, he is the male version of her, which I think is very interesting. Oh, yeah. Well, how do I work it out? Well...
And his hair's shorter.
Yeah. No. The whole, the pic, if you look at the shape of the face, his demeanor, she's turned him into herself. So that's very interesting.
If you say so.
Yes.
I think the cocaine thing, this is something the media cares an awful lot about. I think Michael Gove's problem was the hypocrisy because when he was 32, he took cocaine, so he couldn't blame it on his youth. But he then wrote an article the next day in the Times sort of saying that people shouldn't take hard drugs. So I think he suffers from the hypocrisy angle. I think the media care about it. Funnily enough, it's the very people in the media who probably have taken cocaine in the past that write most condemningly about it. Boris Johnson, I think, was probably wise in what he said yesterday because he's seen what trouble Michael Gove has got himself into with it by being honest. And I don't know whether Michael Gove's campaign will be stalled by this. I hope it isn't, because he's actually a really talented politician.
A lot of the commentary seems to have written him off because of it
I think
already.
Maybe prematurely.
Yeah, that'd be a shame.
Burqas, should we talk about that? Because Boris wrote this on one occasion. It is absolutely ridiculous that people should choose to go around looking like letterboxes, and he was asked about that yesterday as well.
One of the reasons why the public feels alienated now from us all as a breed, politicians, is because too often they feel we are muffling and veiling our language, if I might put it that way. Not speaking as we find, covering everything up in bureaucratic platitudes, when what they want to hear is what we genuinely think.
So he did mention veiling.
3 times.
But not in reference to the specific question. But again, he's saying something that will resonate with a lot of people disillusioned in politics.
Yeah, he's probably saying what a lot of people are thinking. And maybe at the pub, you know, you brought up the pub or in the entertainment, you know, there's probably some people laughing about that. Now he's, again, the front runner. He's best to just sort of dodge things that he can dodge, and not really. He doesn't have any upside in getting into a real debate about anything right now.
His problem is when somebody on the right says something like that about the burqa, the media will jump all over you because they think there's sort of sub-Islamophobic, racist undertones there. If somebody on the left says it, nobody says a word. And the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, on a main BBC programme, said that she wouldn't want her kids looked after by someone wearing a burqa. Now, I think that's equally as objectionable as what Boris said, and yet she was given a complete free pass on it.
This is what happens when I talk about the entertainment value of British politics. Boris Johnson will say something that's very funny, and on a certain level, and he did references to veils 3 times. If you're clever enough, you picked all them up, and he wanted you to pick them up. The other level is he wants you to laugh. The third level is, and I live not far from the Bureau, the studio in the West End, I've seen in the last 6 months women in veils or burqas. Now they have men with them, bodyguards, they go into shops together, they walk down the street. I've seen Muslim women pushed with my own eyes. My friend Yasmin Ali Brown was knocked down in the street. Now, okay, you can say that has nothing to do with what Boris said because most people don't read. But if you have that kind of a language permeating through the body politic, those who have ill intent will pick it up as permission. And, you know, we wouldn't do that. We don't know anyone who would do that. But Boris knows that this is possible. and he doesn't take responsibility for it. That's my beef with him. He talks and acts like a child when he wants to, and a lot of people find that quite charming. But there are people who take him very seriously, and he doesn't take responsibility for that at all.
I kind of agree with you on some of that, in that I think that was an unwise thing for him to say, because even... I mean, I don't think he said it deliberately to cause the kind of incidents that you've just referred to. And we should say that Yasmin doesn't wear a veil, and we don't know why she was knocked down. It could have been something completely different.
She told me.
Well, I know, she's a friend of mine too.
Okay.
But I think if we think that every time we see a woman with a veil walking down the street with a man, the man is a bodyguard. I mean, men did walk down the streets with women before Boris said that.
Oh, listen, Ian, I'm just talking about the frequency suddenly of this. Now, you might be right. I would know because I didn't interview anybody. But this is my neighborhood, and I've noticed a rise in that. So I'm going to make that assumption. Sure. You might be absolutely right. But I'm going to make that assumption that these guys are there to protect. And I have seen incidents. I think
when you're in a position of political leadership, whether it's Boris Johnson, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn on anti-Semitism, whether it's Nigel Farage as well, you do have to be more careful about what you say, because there can be unfortunate consequences. But as I say, I don't believe Boris said that thinking that there would be those kind of consequences.
I agree with you. I agree
Human on Facebook says, here we go, Trump in America, Boris in Britain. We are in for some interesting and unpredictable times. The Trumpian references are littering our Facebook feed. Ted says, Boris will make Great Britain great again. Let us know what
Where
you
does
think.
he live?
Where do you live, Ted?
Iowa.
Ian says Boris will be the end of the Conservative Party.
That's not this, Ian.
Without an eye, but with one eye.
I mean, it could be.
But there is an argument for that, isn't there? What's the argument that if he pushes through a hard Brexit,
Well, look,
then...
The thing is, one of Boris's main selling points is that he can reach parts of the electorate that nobody else can. He's what's called the Heineken candidate after a Heineken advertising campaign. Yeah. And there is a lot of truth in that. And people see him as a possible election winner. The polls point to him being the most popular of all the contenders among the wider electorate. So he could be like that. On the other hand, and you do get politicians who, once they assume the ultimate office, they become actually much better than you ever thought they could be. Boris Johnson was a much better mayor of London than anyone ever thought he would be.
I beg
he was using that yesterday, wasn't he?
However, you can also be much worse than everyone thinks you might. Look at Theresa May, for example. No one thought she would be the disaster that she's turned out to be.
No, they thought she'd be good.
Well, I go back to...
I did. I plead guilty.
I go back to the electability factor, the Conservative Party. And I have to say, unlike the Labour Party, the Conservative Party likes winning elections and intends to win once they go into an election.
Yeah, Labour sort of have this attitude, if we win, that's
fine. Well, they think they'll win the next time.
Yeah.
So the Conservatives don't lose, and they see, and I think there are many people in the Conservative Party who know Boris personally.
We're asking you today, will Boris Johnson be the best choice of Prime Minister for Britain? Anishka says, yes, he's the best choice for PM. Stephen says the UK can't break the habit of making poor decisions.
Oh, how good. Where's he from?
The next Prime Minister will continue our downward spiral into the UK, Stephen. Let's look at Boris hanging from a zip line.
As Mayor of London.
Yeah.
Like Dick Whittington.
This made him very famous. I mean, many people around the world will remember him for this, right, Brett?
Yeah, this is the John Kerry on the windsurfer.
Yes,
in
that's
Nantucket.
right.
How's that going to appeal to the miners in West Virginia?
And if you're watching this, we should probably see him tackling a young child in Japan.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
But watch this. Look at that.
So, Ian,
we've all wanted to do that.
As the expert on this matter, we should probably look at the candidates he's up against.
Oh.
And they're more serious. That's the point, isn't it?
What would you like me to talk about?
Well, in the next hour, we're going to see that whittled down.
Okay.
So do you think
let's start at the bottom right. Mark Harper, former chief whip in the government of David Cameron, nice guy, but nobody knows who he is. He will be out today.
Right.
Which one?
Mark Harper, bottom
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Oh, very good, Matt.
Very good.
Don't give up the day job. Andrea Leadsom, she stood against Theresa May and came second last time. She was the leader of the House of Commons. She resigned a few weeks ago. I think she's very impressive, but I'm afraid she doesn't stand a chance either, so she's probably out today as well. Rory Stewart has set this contest alight. He's the Shadow
Very good on Twitter.
International Development Secretary, great on social media, but has no support in the Commons, really, so he's not likely. He might get through today, but I suspect he won't, so he's not going to win. Esther McVey, former Work and Pensions Secretary...
Upset the nation's sweetheart.
Upset a lot of people recently. I did an interview with her where she said she would cut international aid by half because of all of these airports that are built that can't take planes. And I said, well, where are they then? And she couldn't. She said, oh, on a foreign continent.
Yes.
And that's gone a bit viral.
Absolutely.
Matt Hancock, Health Secretary, he's the youngest contender. Nice guy, but quite waffly on policy in many ways. All of his supporters are Remainers, so he's not going to win. Sajid Javid, great backstory. His parents came here from Pakistan, grew up on one of the most dangerous streets in the country, but he then went into banking, went to Exeter University, but he hasn't really managed to catch that. If you want to see a brilliant political campaign commercial, look up Sajid Javid's new video. Dominic Raab, arch Brexiteer, wants no deal, but again, his campaign hasn't really set fire. So it is between the first three on the top line there. Michael Gove, he stood last time, didn't win, was a close ally of David Cameron, but they fell out over Brexit, and he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back in the last leadership campaign. Not really trusted, but he's a very, very talented politician. And Jeremy Hunt, safe pair of hands, Foreign Secretary.
So Jeremy Hunt represents the middling ground
Isn't that
on
a
this
horrible
one.
thought? You know, the man who called his wife, what did he call her, Chinese, or Japanese, or Chinese, whatever. He didn't know what she was.
Chinese, isn't
Yeah, he didn't know what she was.
He did know what she was.
But what happened to him?
He was at a dinner, and I can't remember the circumstances, but I think he was at a state dinner in Japan, so and he was speaking Japanese, so it was just one of those brain fade moments.
Right, it's called his wife. Anyway, I think the thing to mention, too, or to say to our viewership is that the majority of the British people aren't involved in this actively at all.
No.
So it's
100,000.
Sure. So it is our parliamentary democracy. That is how Parliament works. We don't select the Prime Minister. We don't select only the party members select the leader, and then the leader in this case becomes the Prime Minister. So we're all sort of sitting on the outside with our noses pressed against the window pane, watching this process that's going to determine the next 7 or 8 months. And Boris knows that. He's very smart about it. And he knows that he has to appeal to that selection that's out there in the country.
And they're older, they're wealthier, typically.
Right.
They're spread around the country.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's this older demographic that are the Tory party members.
The average age is 57. Now I'm 56, so I don't consider that old.
Definitely really old.
So, yeah, give or take. But look, I think, that's again, flies in the face of this decade's trend away from establishment and into new and exciting. And, even though many of the leaders that have been elected are older, like Trump, and maybe we'll see that with Joe Biden, but still, there is some rejection of mainstream politicians. And whereas if you have 160,000 Tory party members making the decision, average age 56, 57, that's not really going to lend itself to...
But, Greg, that's the beauty of Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is not really a politician. Boris Johnson is an entity. He's a dream. He's something that England, in particular, imagines the country to be. Not Scotland, not Wales, what England imagines the country to be. So he plays that trope up big time. So you can actually elect Boris Johnson and think you're not electing a politician. So he does that all the time. It's, as I say, it's great theatre. Great theatre.
He is partly celebrity. But one other interesting thing is not a single one of those candidates is over the age of 60. Now, in the United States, that would be unthinkable. In most other countries, it would be unthinkable.
Yeah, it seems that way. I mean, there's a cycle every 16 years or so. You want young. You want Bill Clinton in '92 and Obama in 08. I've always felt like giving it to the guy who's hung around long enough. The ultimate was Bob Dole in '96. I mean, that's just rewarding someone who sticks around. And even McCain to a certain degree in 08. You know, he hung around long enough, ran a couple of times. It's great when you see a 40-something actually make some waves.
And Biden might not make it through the whole thing. But America right now, those who don't like
You're
Trump,
not
they
killing him
just
off,
want...
are you?
No, I don't, not at all. But no, he's got a great campaign manager. She'll keep him up. But right now, for people in the Democratic base, is to get rid of Trump. Whoever can do that, that's all they care
Marcel
about.
says, unlike America, the UK was once a great nation.
It
Like
still is.
America,
That's
it's
not
being
fair.
ruined by conservatives.
Not fair.
You could answer that.
That's not fair, and I'm not even conservative by any means, but I think that's sort of narrow-minded,
conservative, if not
ridiculous.
That is just a bigoted
And that's a ridiculous comment.
Greg ruined the country.
And that's a
should be
ridiculous
PM.
comment.
So,
A friend of Trump is a friend indeed. Boris for Prime Minister, says Moses. It was interesting, wasn't it, that he took a call from Trump, but he didn't meet Trump when he was over.
Yeah, because he was doing a parliamentary husting. So, I mean, look, you've got to be able to count. You've got to know your electorate. And Boris does know his electorate.
Absolutely.
And look, if he wins, he's going to shake things up. The European leaders do not like him. They remember him as Foreign Secretary. They didn't get on with him then. And from the point of view of doing a deal with the EU, possibly he's not the ideal candidate in many ways. Jeremy Hunt is probably, he would pitch himself as the conciliator, somebody who can strike a deal, former businessman. But, I mean, Boris has this relationship with Trump in a way that none of the others do.
It's going to be useful.
You can argue that that's a bad thing, but you'd have to say overall, I would say it's a good thing.
But Boris, like Nigel Farage, is someone Europe knows very well. They know exactly what he's going to do. They got the Boris Johnson playbook lined out there.
Boris doesn't know what he's going to do.
Well, they
so
know,
I don't know how
that,
they
but
would
that's
know.
part of it, okay? That's part of it that Boris doesn't know. So they're all ready for this guy. And it's sad because, of course, if we go out with no deal, we are more firmly in the Trump camp.
We've got a last-minute rush from Boris supporters. Let's get them in. Kofi says Boris has talent, the charisma to help Britain sail through this. And Bayer says Boris Johnson all the way. Thank you for watching. Do listen again to the podcast. Look up CNN Talk on Apple Podcasts. There we are.